Hi, I'm Charlotte, and welcome to the Thinking Pod. So, today we are going to think about bereavement, grief, and loss. And it's an important topic because we often, as parents, don't really know how to talk about these very sensitive, big feelings with our children. We're not really sure whether to kind of not talk about it at all and steer away from it, or whether we should approach the subject ourselves. A key thing to remember is that it's very dependent on the child's age, how they manage the feelings of grief. And a younger child will kind of dip in and out. So they might have a question and they might come and ask you the question. And then before you've even finished trying to answer it or trying to formulate an answer, they've gone and they're on to something else. But they're likely to come back to it at a different time of the day. Older children will respond a bit differently and they might want to know lots of very detailed questions. And it's very important to answer in an age appropriate way. So they won't necessarily need all the details, but something will be enough to satisfy them. Adolescents, teenagers are likely to not ask a great deal of questions, but will probably go online and Google things that they want to know. It's important that we're as open and honest as we can be with our children because they will have a sense that something's going on, even if they haven't been told anything. And so it's really helpful if you are able to sit down and think about how to explain either what's happening if there's been a recent diagnosis and you know that a loved one is going to die, or if it's a sudden death, which can be very tricky because you're already trying to manage your own emotional responses to this shock that you're all experiencing. The important thing is that actually these feelings are very real, ordinary feelings when you're in the space of grief and bereavement. It's okay to cry in front of your children, and it's okay to say, I don't know. So if children have questions and you don't know the answer to them, it's absolutely fine to say, actually, I don't know the answer, but we can think about it a different time, or I will try and find out the answer. You don't need to know all the answers. And actually, sometimes children don't need to know all of the details, but they need to know it in an age appropriate way. Some things to think about is to use the words like death and dying. So stay away from things like passed away or gone to sleep, because for children that can be really confusing. If you think about this idea of gone to sleep, we're all going to go to sleep tonight, and we hope that we wake up in the morning. But for a child, it can be terrifying to think, well, I'm going to go to sleep and I'm not going to come back. So we need to be really mindful of the words that we use. So just think about using words like death and dying, but also explaining what death and dying means. Now, there are loads of really good, helpful resources and books out there that you can use to explain this idea of death and dying to your child. And in fact, if you go onto my website or you join our Facebook group, you will be able to find lots of resources there that will help you with this. Some things to think about if you know that the person you love is dying, and that is how to kind of talk about that with your child. It's best to be as honest as you can, but also try to create some memories of this time. So ideas would be questionnaires, asking the loved person things like who was their best friend in school, what was their favorite school dinner, who was their favorite teacher, because it allows the person who is dying and the child to connect and have those conversations in a more sort of free flowing way. And it also adds a bit of fun into it. So even though death is sad and can feel really quite painful, we can also see that there can be joy and laughter in amongst this time of real despair. Other things to think about are the idea that if there is a sudden death, that we can't explain that to our child, or that they should be kept out of the loop because they won't understand. Children will absolutely pick up on feelings in the home and they need to be given an explanation that is right for them. Parents often come to me and ask, should my child go to the funeral? Now, this is a very personal thing for you and your child, and it's something that you need to talk through. And I really know that this can be very difficult when you're in that moment of grief and it's the last thing that you want to do. But find a way to enable you to talk about what the funeral is, even if that means getting outside help, but what the funeral is and what would happen. And there's an opportunity for you to say goodbye to the loved one. Maybe even give the child a role if they like. Some children like to have something to say, or they might say something at the wake, but sometimes it can feel like an important part of saying goodbye to the person if they've had some sort of part in it, choosing a hymn, writing a letter to the person that's passed. I think it's also important to remember that loss and grief doesn't just have to focus on the loss of a loved one. Sometimes this can be very instilled in young children when you move houses, when a dear toy is lost or a pet. And this is quite significant for young children because that sense of loss can feel quite profound. So don't underestimate the feelings of attachment that a child has to an object. So it could be a pet, or it could be a toy, or it could be somewhere that you live. But anything that they have grown attached to that has been stable and secure for them, they are likely to feel it as a loss. It's important that we find words to talk to children about this and to prepare them, if at all possible, for the impending loss that they're going to feel. So saying things like, I think this is really hard for you. I can see how difficult it is. I understand you're really upset. I feel really upset too. Will all help them to feel like they're not alone. Remember that there's lots of support out there for bereavement and loss, and there's lots of ways we can think about talking this through with children. But I think for parents as well, it can also feel really tough. We can feel like we have to be the ones to hold it all together, and actually, sometimes we might just feel like falling apart. And sometimes we need to fall apart to be able to pick ourselves back up. There's an idea with loss of any type. So that we kind of sit in this bubble. And when the loss first occurs, the bubble is just so tightly around us that we can't see anything else. We are just consumed by the restriction of this bubble. And that's the grief that we're feeling. Gradually, over time, things start to push into the bubble that mean that we might be able to go back to work, or we might go ahead and do something that we used to enjoy before the loss. And gradually, the bubble gets wider and wider and allows other things in. The grief doesn't go away though. The bereavement and the loss is still there. The bubble is still there, but it's not as all encompassing as it was when it first happened. So although there might always be these feelings of loss and grief, it won't be as consuming as it is in the first instance. And I think it's really important to remember that. And for children, remember that they will dip in and out of this bubble. And sometimes the bubble will feel really tight around them and they won't really understand and they need help to put words to that. And other times they will feel much more freer of it. It's kind of the joy of childhood, I guess, that they're much more able to kind of dip in and out of that grief than we as adults are. If you would like to access further resources, you can find them on my website, www.thethinkingpod.com, and there are loads of different resources there for different things. You are more than welcome to download them. They're completely free. You can also join our Parent and Support Pod on Facebook, which is there to offer support to parents and carers who need it. But if you have a specific question or there's something you'd really like to talk through, then again, you can go onto my website and you can contact me and I will do my very best to get back to you as soon as I can. I hope this has been helpful. Take care.